Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Future Digital Services webinar. We are going to be running a session today which is covering off about Runnymede Council is transforming to service delivery using Jadu and the Microsoft Teams integration. Just to give you a quick idea of the agenda, I think agenda is probably a loose term for this morning. These are the key themes that we'll be covering through. So firstly, we'll be looking at Jadu's digital layer framework that we're talking about, a little bit about interoperability and introducing the integrations that we're talking about today. And then we're going to get onto the main part of the event this morning, which is to hand over to Katie and Stephen from Runnymede, who are going to talk you through some of the challenges that they observed, about how they're integrating with Microsoft Teams. We're going to do a live demo. Fingers crossed. We all know the dangers of live demo, but we're going to do a live demo so that you can see the integration action. And then Stephen and Katie are going to talk about some of the things that they're looking at next. A quick introduction to your speakers today. So firstly, I'm Steve Strinick. I'm the Vice President of Business Transformation. At the moment, I'm heading up our professional services teams within Jadu and helping organisations in maximising their investment in their technology, really. Stephen, would you like to do a quick introduction for us?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. So, hi everyone, my name is Stephen. I'm the Head of Digital Innovation and Delivery at Runnymede Council. So I head up the Digital Transformation and Delivery team. Looking forward to the session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And Katie?
Thank you, Steve. My name's Katie. I'm Digital Delivery Manager for Runnymede Borough Council. Been with the council a couple of years and got a real, Stephen and the whole team, we've got a real passion for technology. So we're really pleased to be sharing what we've been doing with you today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katie. So I'm going to start off with just a view over what we're calling in Jadu the digital layer. And the digital layer is really about us thinking about how to describe where we're seeing the current framework that's needed within organisations, about looking at about how technology and services are really delivered. And I think what we're trying to get to is to help organisations understand how you can prepare yourself for things like AI, wider integration and interoperability between different products and services that you might have, but also about how you connect your back office systems to the customer facing tools in a way that's kind of transparent, efficient and accessible. So just walking through that layers really. The first one is really the back end layer. And what we're looking at there is the foundational layer. This is where your kind of core systems of record sits, where you would see things like, I don't know, your highways or your social care or your ERP systems, those kind of very, very big line of business specific systems. But it's also where you might see things such as robotic process automation or orchestration. But it's also where you might see things like AI development happening. What we're really looking at here is about there's a whole range of services which sit in that back end layer, which are kind of static within the organization, and they need some integration with, and they need to be able to move through those different layers. Coming up from that one layer is our customer layer. I mean, this is really where we see our systems of engagement. So things like customer relationship management, case management, websites, portals, forms, and collect all the things that kind of collect and manage customer data. No surprises here for us talking on behalf of Jadu. You know, this is an area where we really provide lots of the products and services that I know many of you are already using. But also where we're looking at here is about how do you start to leverage some of the capabilities that you've got in your wider ecosystem? And this is where we're starting to think about things like Power Platform, Power Ups, and they're pretty much ubiquitous across organizations now. And part of the reason that we're talking about a Teams integration today is because actually this is where we see this sitting, is in this kind of middle customer layer. The final layer is really about product, and product is where you would see services being built, and this is like your customer facing layer really, but also this is where you might be seeing about how you start to leverage AI and automation here. So agents for everyday use, addressing customers' needs. This might be where you see things like chatbots and automation coming through in components like that. So we spent a fair bit of time working through this kind of digital layer and thinking about how to bring this to life really. And one of the first things that we started to look at was we see Teams in use across pretty much every organisation that we work with now. Is across the public sector is almost in every organisation. And we looked at this a few years ago and looking at in terms of could you integrate Jadu and Teams? And actually, when we started to look at it, the core capabilities from the Microsoft side wasn't really there to be able to enable that kind of two-way integration. But there was some significant changes in the Microsoft stack last year, which meant that actually this became a reality. And we were really fortunate in Jadu Academy last year that we started to have a conversation with Stephen over lunch about this. And he really hooked into the idea about how this could work. And I literally saw the sparks of imagination fly as he thought, well, we could be doing this and we could be doing this. And what about if we did it like this? And so we spent some time with Stephen and his team working through this and thinking about like, actually, how would this do? The interesting thing is there's no new technology in here. This is all existing capabilities, and it's really reusing the capabilities we've got. And that's where our kind of view about interoperability comes in. What we're really looking at is about how do you move your data to real time? How do you maximize your current investment in technology? Because we all know that a lot of money is spent in technology, particularly in the whole kind of Microsoft ecosystem and the capabilities that brings to you as an organization. But how do you also build a framework, and that framework being used to be able to expand into other applications, which you might be able to use something like Power Automate connectors to leverage. And what we're really showing you today is kind of a start of a journey. And there'll be many, many use cases that people will be thinking about, that will be sparking ideas and creativity as you're watching the demonstration today. And I suppose my ask to you all is, I'd really like to hear what those use cases are as well. You know, we'd like to know how people are thinking about using the products and the tools that they've got and where your successes are, and all of those. If you do need help and you want to move forward with this kind of approach, you can speak to anybody at Jadu, via your account manager, off the back end of this webinar, and we'll be happy to have that conversation with you to be able to take it forward. What I've just demonstrated at the bottom of the screen there, if you can see, is a really simple workflow that explains kind of what we're going to be talking about today. It's using different capabilities within your technology architecture. The first one with a Jadu form being completed, raising a case in Jadu Connect, moving into Power Automate to do some processing, maybe bringing in some OneDrive capabilities, or you could be branching out into Copilot for cognitive AI at this point, and then into Teams itself, and then finally a two-way communication back into Jadu again. The workflow is actually as simple as that. There's some bits you need to do around error handling, etc. And I'm sure Stephen will cover those off more, Getty, as we move through. But that's enough of me kind of talking. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to hand over to Stephen and Katie, and they're going to tell you about all of the interesting stuff that they've been doing. So, Katie, over to you.
In local authorities, we all face a range of challenges, from managing our residents' inquiries and service requests efficiently to ensuring we've got seamless communication between departments, because we can't manage these service requests efficiently without this communication. And as we'll go on to look at, part of these challenges come from slow response times and maybe not knowing where people have picked up emails. So our integration, as you'll see as we go through, it enables this real-time data sharing and really reduces these challenges. So are emails a thing of the past? I think we can all agree that the way we communicate at work is changing. And for years, email has been the primary tool for collaboration. But I don't know about you guys, but my inbox is usually overflowing. Coming back from holiday sort of leaves you with dread of what you're coming back to. Often, if you've been part of a group, a chain of emails with multiple people, you might be picking up the latest one, but you might have missed vital information in earlier ones. Responses can be slow, and it does make it hard to track important information. So by embracing the shift in communication, we won't just be cutting down emails, it also improves productivity and actually makes our communication simpler, faster and more effective. So what are our issues with email? Crowded inboxes, I said, you get a lot of emails. Some of it might be junk. It might not be relevant. Email threads tend to fragment, so it can be quite difficult to lose track. If you have reminders, they're in isolation. They maybe don't necessarily work as efficiently as they should do. You get no real-time feedback from emails. There's also minimal integration with other tools. You can integrate it, but it's not as easy. And as we said before, you don't get the real-time feedback. So emails do just sit there static, waiting. The person who sent them doesn't necessarily know what you've done with it afterwards. So with what we're going to talk about today, so the current procedure we've got, we get a case, in this case, a phone call. It's triaged by customer services to the relevant officer. The officer might be busy. They might be on this call. It might be Stephen or I, and we're on this call. We can't answer. So it's sent to our mailbox. What happens to it then? The customer service agent and even the resident or whoever called doesn't know if that email's been picked up. Maybe it's been missed. Maybe it's been even picked up by junk. You just don't know what's happened to it. This is our unhappy path. If the customer calls back in again, then customer services don't know if they're calling back after being spoken to or not. It's not ideal for residents or for staff. Our happy part, we have the case. Again, it gets triaged, gets sent to the mailbox. A Jadu form is completed, so then we know exactly what's happened to it. Happy part. Case management. So what are our options for case management? We can progress the case manually or the call manually in Jadu Connect. Progress it in Outlook using forms, or a case progression via a system integration. And this is what we're going to be talking about today. There is a better way. For anyone that's spoken to our team at Runnymede before, you may know we are really big fans of building whatever we can in-house. And that's why we're here now to talk about a more efficient solution, which stems from Teams messaging. So over to Stephen.
Thank you, Katie. So as Katie said, we do believe there's a better way. And the reason we believe that is because of some of the challenges we have with emails. And what we're going to show you today is how you could leverage Teams using something called an adaptive card to potentially streamline the communication and feedback loop with back office teams. So within my next slide, really what I want to focus on is, well, what's an adaptive card? So within Teams, we're all using Teams for things like calls, chats, setting up collaboration spaces. So it's not a new tool for us. And within those spaces, you can see timeline messages. And an adaptive card is like a snippet of content that you can then post to one of those chats or channels or groups. And for me, I think of an adaptive card as a message or a form within Teams that your officers across the council can interact with. So on the slide here, we can see quite clearly there's an adaptive card for a department callback request, which is the use case we're going to go through today. And in here, you can see lots of content above the actual call to actions. And this information comes from Jadu Connect. So we can post that information to Teams, and then we can have some clear call to actions, which we'll go through later. And the reason we started looking at this, and as Steve, you said at the Connect Day last year, we were really excited about challenging the status quo. We could see bottlenecks with emails across a lot of our workflows that we've built out within Jadu Connect, because primarily we're sending emails to an inbox and we're using Jadu XFP, so their forms package, to do the data capture elements. And we wanted to improve on that for all the reasons Katie set out before. So in terms of next steps, what we needed to do was spin up a proof of concept and maximize the tools we already have. So some of the technology we've talked about today already is things like Power Automate. Most of you will have access to that today free of charge within your E3 or E5 licenses. And you've got some of the other tools within Connect that we'll go through today. So spinning up this solution as a proof of concept was the natural next step for us. What we didn't want to do at Runnymede was we didn't want to force all of our officers to learn a system just in case they needed to deal with a piece of contact from our residents. we have different user personas at the council. So our customer services team in Jadu all day, every day, they're living and breathing it. And then we've got other council service areas like our antisocial behaviour team, where we've built out our ASB system using Jadu Connect. They're also in Connect all day, every day. But then if you think about back office staff like your corporate finance team, procurement, legal, and communications, for example, they could still get customer contact, but they might not always have access to your CRM system. And we were trying to bridge the gap before using emails and forms, and that didn't quite work for us. And that's where I think there's a big space for this type of solution going forward. And that's why we think there's a better way to handle this going forward. So within my next slide, what I'm going to talk about is a little bit around how the building blocks work. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Jadu case management piece. So for those of you that build and design in Jadu Connect, you'll be familiar with things like statuses, transitions, rules, and then you can trigger rules to do different tasks. So at Runnymede, we've really leveraged that, and we can do a lot of case management progression in there. But then there is a real space for then looking at some of the other capabilities you've got within your tech stack at your council. So often it's termed as middleware. So there's companies out there like Zapier that you could use. But if you're already using Microsoft licenses, you have access to Power Automate. So what we're saying today is maximize the technology you've got. Have a look at this technology because it will open the doors to lots more opportunity, including AI in the future. So the slide here shows how you can then interact with Jadu Connect using some of those building blocks. So if you look at the top block, we're looking at something called a webhook. So for those that don't know, a webhook effectively can post data from your Connect to an endpoint. And once we post it there, we can then use that data to then facilitate another automation. So it could trigger an automation, or it could be used for other parts of your workflow. And that big box in the middle, automation tools and features, what we're really talking about today is Power Automate and the capability that it all offers you. And then once you've run a workflow and you've done some extra stuff, added value outside of Jadu Connect, how do we get it back in? And we use something called the Jadu Connect Service API. So that's readily available to us to use. We've leveraged it a lot at Runnymede for integrating our phone system, so we can create cases for telephone calls. We leverage it for things like capturing voicemails. We've looked at it for emails in the past. So using their Service API, we can create cases, we can edit cases, so we can put data back into a case, we can transition and progress a case. So what we're talking about is some fundamental building blocks that we can use in local government using the Jadu Connect platform, and its extensibility in terms of being able to take data out and put it back in, I think is really powerful for us. So then what I'd like to do is then put a spotlight in terms of the solution we have at Runnymede. So how does it actually work for Runnymede in terms of our use case? So if we start from the beginning, we had a pain point where customers would call Runnymede Borough Council, our customer services team would take the call and they would triage that call. When they're triaging, if they can't transfer the call, our service delivery model is we take a telephone message. And for us, we think that's a better experience rather than just leaving a voicemail, because we could track it in our CRM system and then we can actually make sure they're closed down and actioned. So previously we were sending an email and asking officers to close the case down using a Jadu XFP form. And then the slide here now talks about how this new solution works and how it all fits together. So I call it 8 simple steps, but there's no doubt that this is actually quite a complex workflow that you need to work through within Power Automate. So it includes lots of things like error handling. But if we take the 8 steps of the process, the first step would be creating the case in Jadu Connect. And you can do that. The most common way, as we all know, will be submitting a Jadu form to create the case. Once you create the case, you could trigger a webhook. So for Runnymede, we trigger our webhooks instantly when the case is created, but you can create rules within Jadu to trigger webhooks at different points within your case management workflow. So if you're further down the workflow and you want to trigger a webhook, you could do that then. Or if you want to trigger something instantly like we have, you could do that too. Once you've triggered the webhook, it has to go somewhere. So within Power Automate, that's when that comes in, because there's something called a HTTP request receiver. And this is the start of a Power Automate flow for us in this instance. So it's an event really. So we're saying, can we then send data to this endpoint? Once the endpoint receives the data, Then what we do is we pass the webhook JSON. So what that means in plain English is once we've received the data, we split the data out and make those data variables available so that we could use that later. And what we then do is, if we take the example of creating a chat, which is the next part of our workflow, we might have the email address as a variable. We need to make that available so then we can create the chat. So it's a logical progression through your workflow. As Steve said, I think Microsoft have really upped their game in terms of capability. So there's lots of connectors and actions out there, and some new Teams connectors are available to us. So things like creating a chat with an officer, we can now do that through Power Automate. And that starts the process for posting the adaptive card. One thing I wanted to say on the call is there are different models, and the model we're showing you today is just one way of doing it. So we send a case directly to an officer, but there is an argument that you could send a case to a team space. So if you had a comms team space, for example, and you wanted to send all of their customer contact to that group and then tag someone into that, you can do that model too. But what we decided to do for our proof of concept and pilot was to send it directly to the officer because we felt it was more appropriate for telephone messages. Once we've created that chat, we then post an adaptive card. So you see on the earlier screen, an adaptive card is a snippet of content. So you can design that content to look and feel however you need for your service design. You can surface information from Connect as a bit of a backdrop to the contact request. And then you can also design data capture within that form, so data input. So if you needed to ask a series of questions, you can do that within an adaptive card. One thing I would caveat to everyone on the call is this works really well for basic data capture. So if you wanted to understand whether a job had been done and what the outcome was, an adaptive card works brilliant for that. But for those of you that have been designing and building some more complex workflows in Jadu Connect using the logics and some of the other powerful capability in Jadu XFP, it won't be doing all of that within Power Automate, particularly in the adaptive card. So I think when you look at the model that we're showing today, I think you need to look at it on a case-by-case basis and work out what tools best fit your use case at the time. The good thing about adaptive cards is once you've sent that to an officer, so I've sent Katie her telephone message, we then wait for the response. And what Katie's done within the workflow is she's built out lots of error handling and reminders. And this is the added value that you can't see on the screen. But effectively, we can set up a series of SLAs, send the officer a reminder to go and complete the card. And then for those of you that are in Teams all the time, in the top left, you have an activity tab, and it lets you know alerts when you need to do something or something's happened within your environment. And you can even set up an alert so it flags up in the activity tab so that you can go back and see what the action was, and then you can even link back to your adaptive card. So there's some really cool capability here that helps our officers, because ultimately the work that we do in local government is about helping our customers. And if we can bridge the gap between the customers, our customer services team and the CRM, and our officers that really just want to get on with the job, if we can bridge that gap down using technology like this, it's a win-win for everyone, I think. The final part was that transition case. So you'll see at the bottom there, that's where we can then update the case within Jadu Connect. So for this particular use case, what we're doing at Runnymede is we're applying a transition, and that transition includes a series of data that we post back into the timeline. So that helps, one, in terms of close the case down, and two, make sure we've got all the data capture in our timeline history. So we got full transparency in terms of the case progression. So that kind of gives you a nice round robin of the high level solution. As I say, there's lots more detail behind it, and the workflow with all the error handling and all and the reminders is quite complex. But when you boil it down, there's some of the key steps. And then I think with that, what we'd like to do is, if that's okay, Steve, I think we'll start to look at a demo, if that's okay with everyone. What we're going to do now, so Katie's going to call me so you can see the end-to-end journey. So at Runnymede, we've got telephony integration. So we automatically screen pop customer records and we create cases in Jadu. So what you can see on the screen here is our telephony integration. When I take Katie's call in customer services, the first step of the process is, as you can see here, you can see the customer's account. So that's part of our telephony piece, and it really helps streamline that first part of the call in terms of identifying who the customer is. But say, for example, if Katie couldn't get through to, say, our back office team, like our communications team, bear with me. What you can see here is the person record, so you'll all be familiar with this. So then our advisors, they would create a case. So for us, it's called department callback. Effectively, it's a telephone message. Very simple use case, but just to show as a proof of concept the capability here. You can then select a service area. So for our use case, we select the service area. And then what we do is we ask who we want to send the telephone message to. So that's the email address here. Then what we do, you can see, is pre-fill in all of our customer information. Then we can do the details of the callback. So if we add something around today, so Teams demo integration. And then we've got a unique reference as well. So some of this is all configurable for your council. The key point to note here is all of this data we can surface in an adaptive card, and we'll show you how now. So when you submit your Jadu XFP form, what happens is it will create a case. So you'll see in here, we've now got a case in Jadu. And what happened previously was we would fire off this email to an officer, and they would have a link to an XFP form. And then that would allow the the officer to review the contact and then close it down. But this is the game changer bit, really. So you can see all the information there. What you'll then see is if I go over to the separate environment I've got here, this is just sent it through now. So 10:59, you can see it's a live one. What you can see here is our adaptive card template. So all of this is configurable. So we've put headings in, we've pulled through our case reference number. We also use colors to denote whether an action was required. So in this instance, it's showing as red. So it's really clear for our officers to see there's an action required. And we got some good feedback from our staff when we were testing this, that they'd like to introduce RAG ratings for, so they can quickly see what needed doing. Some of this messaging is hard-coded, so you can hard-code sentences in if you needed to. So these are hard-coded in. And then these variables here are all dynamically populated, and they're produced basically through that workflow we just spoke about. So as I submitted that case in Jadu, we've sent the webhook to our Power Automate flow. We've split out the data so we can make that available to use. And then within our adaptive card template, we've added these placeholders in. So each time this content within Microsoft Teams can dynamically change depending on what the telephone message is. In terms of other really important features, this one for us was a bit of a game changer. So selecting an officer. So within here, there's something called People Picker. So in Microsoft Teams, you can add a variable that connects to your Microsoft Active Directory accounts using their Graph API. And it allows you to search for another officer. So this part of the service design was built so that we could transfer a contact to someone else within the business that may be better placed to deal with it. So in this instance, you can just start to search, and you'll see us then pulling through our Active Directory. And then if we wanted to, we could then send a comment on. So for Katie, I could just say, please, can you help? And then we can reassign that contact. For the purpose of the demo, I won't do that now because I want to complete it so you can see it, but you can then reassign and it goes back round in a nice loop. In terms of closing the contact down, once the officer has dealt with it, so in this use case, I've made the call, I've spoken to Katie, and then all the officer's asked to do is just confirm the date they dealt with it, confirm the outcome of the call. So you've got different options here, and then you can add some call notes. So for here, you could just add whatever you wanted. In terms of the adaptive card, we've already spoke, all of this is customizable, even the data capture elements. So you can add click to reveal content depending on the path you're doing. So like we've done here, or you can even just have a free text box on there as well. So there's lots of different options. When we complete the adaptive card, one thing we done, and we really learned, didn't we, Katie, as we were building out the proof of concept, was how do we make the card useful to an officer once the action was done? So initially, adaptive cards automatically close down and it just says it's been completed. But what we done was we done some research and we looked at other capability, and there's actions within Microsoft Power Automate where you can update an adaptive card. So what we've done is effectively replace the old card with a completed card. And here, as you can see, we're using color to show that that's actually been completed. We've kept the information so the officer has a timeline of all of their activity, but you'll see here we've updated the adaptive card with the completion content, so we can see the date it was complete, we can see the note, and we can see the callback outcome. Now, the final part of the demo to show you is, well, what does this look like in Jadu Connect? So as you can see here, this is exactly the same case reference, and you can see the original date and timestamp of the telephone message that we took earlier on the demo. And then you can see, using our Outlook integration, we've actually posted the outputs of that adaptive card. So you can see that it's completed by RBC Automation. So this is the user account that we use to power our API. We've got the completed date. We've also got additional comments that I added in. And then finally, you've got the outcome. So you can now see how you can have Connect running, and then how Microsoft Teams can really easily interact with it in terms of progressing cases and putting data back in. So I'm going to pause there because I've done a lot of speaking, and then I think I'm going to pass back over to Katie, who's going to talk a little bit about what we're doing next in terms of progressing some of this technical work we've been working on.
So this is just a really quick view of really basic of the process that Stephen just showed you, and just highlighting the reassignment and the reminders being issued, and then what how the greens obviously indicate each stage that it could be closed at. So what is next? So telephone messages. This is a system we already have live and in place. Customer calls in, telephone message left, and then we use the email process to get the messages to the officers. Customer contact, we're still in test with this, and incoming post we're also in test with. The idea with incoming post is it gets scanned in, so we've got digital copies of it, and then this will be saved into a OneDrive folder, which then we use automation to collect that, and then based on what the file name convention that's used, we know which department it's going to. So then the automation will has a list of email addresses for departments based on the related to the file names that we're going to use, the codes, and then it'll pick the file name up and then divert it to whichever department email the post has been put in for. So complaint responses, this is another process that we've got in our pipeline. Again, it's just to try and streamline processes for our colleagues. Those that aren't that used to using Jadu, if they can keep it in Teams, which is always open, then it just makes everything run a lot more efficiently. This is just some quick screenshots of our tests for the customer contact and incoming letters received. And again, it'll run through a very similar process. There's quite a few more steps than what we've shown, but it is very simple. And there is an awful lot of help about Jadu. Have been brilliant. There is a lot of guidance out there. So if this is something that you're thinking of, then don't be afraid of it. I know it all seems like it's, if you're not used to code, it seems like it's quite a big step, but it is very much low code and anyone can do it. Particularly with the help that we had with Rihanna at Jadu.
Yeah. Katie, just on that final slide of the adaptive card, can I focus on the AI piece just for a second?
Sure.
Sorry. So on the left-hand adaptive card, you can see customer contact. So very similar to the model that we just been looking at today, but you'll see some additional fields in there. So on the left-hand side, you've got Copilot Assistant. So what this model will open up to councils is the ability to tap into AI Builder connectors that are readily available in Power Automate, or in the near future using the ChatGPT prompt and ground it with your own data and documents. So on the left-hand side, you've got things like a summary of the contact. So if you were needing some AI capability to help your officers in terms of pulling out the key points of a contact, you can do that using this model. You can even do things like look at sentiment analysis to look at whether it's positive, negative, or indifferent. And then within the use case on the left-hand side as well, you've also got a suggested response. So in the future, you could start to connect these other capabilities together to then supplement and add value to the adaptive card and for your officers. And you'll see in there that we've pre-filled a suggested response. We're not saying to an officer they should take that response, but we're trying to assist them. So there's other opportunities, I think, that can come with this later down the line.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katie and Stephen. And this feels like a really good time to use the little react button at the top of Teams, as we can't clap them in person. Not only for the amazing work that they've done, like on integrating Jadu and Teams together, and the thinking they've been doing around this innovation, but also just to recognise, you know, how important it is for us as be putting ourselves out there in front of our peers, sharing our ideas, sharing our innovation, you know, and really driving the way that we're moving forwards in the public sector now. So amazing. Thank you so much, Stephen and Katie. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Have a great day, and hopefully we'll speak to you all at some point soon.